Oi. All right. What South London taught me about risk, fear, and ownership. So those are the three things that I'm going to be talking about in this video. You might be asking why risk, why fear, and why ownership. The reason why I've chose these things is because number one, risk, or like the concept of risk, determines the decisions that we make on a business level, more specifically when assessing property deals, right? The next part being fear. Fear is baked into all of us, and our perception of it basically determines how we operate and how we move. So I'm going to touch on that. And then lastly, ownership. Ownership for me, it was a big thing. This is why I entered property and I started buying and developing. But I'm going to touch on the importance of ownership as well towards the end. So the first thing being risk. So what did growing up in South London teach me about risk? Now, in any, I don't know if it's specific to like cities, like inner cities, or if it's just areas, I don't even want to say like impoverished, because I didn't even grow up in mad poverty or anything, but in South anyway, it's almost like growing up in an environment where risk doesn't really exist. Maybe it's because we were so young and we didn't really fathom how certain things could play out and like the consequences of doing certain things. But because you're naturally surrounded by a lot of people that would do things without thinking about the consequence of their actions, we're speaking in like a negative light, right? Because that's what risk plays on. Risk basically says that, you know, if this goes wrong, like you can fuck up big, basically, in layman's terms. So growing up around people that were doing a lot of risky shit, so to say, right, it almost hardwired into our DNA that like risk is nothing. That the more you do something, the more you become comfortable with it. And I say that to say this, when I turned 21, I think I was, 21, and I bought the first very property at auction, the whole nature and the dynamic of the process was considered risky, right? And the average person wouldn't have done it because going back in time, it was ludicrous, and it isn't the advice that I would give to anyone because of how things could play out if you're on the wrong end, right, of the situation. But going into that purchase and how I approached the whole scenario in general, the concept of it being risky, you know, using a bridging loan for the first time, that being a hell of a risk, not having even a mortgage to my name, not having bought anything before, and I'm delving into the deep end at auction, buying a house using a bridging loan, not knowing or having done any real research. I didn't have any guidance whatsoever. I just thought, you know what, let me do it, right? Because, like I said, growing up, you're used to just doing stuff that are innately risky, and you've done it for so long, the concept of things going wrong and you suffering, right, almost completely eluded me. So I went into that situation basically with just like my just big dick energy. That's what they call it. Like I went into it with complete confidence that I could pull it off, and it worked. But I suffered a lot in the process, right? And I say that to say, when you're looking at, especially in property anyway, I can speak for property because I've done it. When you're looking at taking on, whether it's a deal, whether you're looking to work with an investor, whatever it is, a lot of the decisions that you make, right, are always going to involve an element of risk. And that's ultimately what entrepreneurship is. They say that the mantra of an entrepreneur is that you jump into a plane, not even jump into a plane. You haven't jumped out of it yet, but you hop on a plane, right? And you jump out of that plane and your parachute isn't on yet, right? And it's not even built. But you jump out of that plane and then you learn to build the parachute on the way down. Now, that saying in itself is like that is risky as fuck, right? Like no sane person would just jump out of a plane and the parachute hasn't been built yet. But that is ultimately what entrepreneurship is, and a lot of property, depending on how you do it, the way in which I did it, it was entrepreneurship in its purest form, right? Which, as I've just said, it ties heavily into it being very high risk. But because of my upbringing, it's almost like I wasn't phased to take on that risk. And for anyone else that had a similar upbringing, you would know, like you'd have almost like the belief and like the fuck it attitude to just do anything, because it's like how bad can it actually be? So yeah, I say that to say ultimately my point is there's always going to be an element of risk that you have to deal with, but you have to be able to accurately assess it, right? And then make the right or the best decision for you, considering, like the elements of whatever it is that you're looking at. In my case, if I'm evaluating two different deals, I'll consider the quote unquote risk factor and I'll bake that into my decision, right? And ultimately move with the thing that makes the most sense. But I'll never allow myself to really make a decision purely to avoid risk. Like being risk averse is not in my nature, right? And that is largely due to my upbringing. And that actually brings me on to the second thing that I'm gonna mention, and that's fear, right? When you look at what fear is, it exists in all of us, right? Like if anyone tries to tell you that they don't fear anything, blah blah blah, they're just chatting shit. Like fear exists within all of us, right? It's just about how we use it and how we manipulate it to either work for us, or a lot of the time people just let it run their lives, right? And they base all their decisions from a place of being fearful. And in my case anyway, I like to use it as a almost like a beacon of information. So you might be thinking like, what does that even mean? Now, when you look at it at a base level, the reason why fear exists in humans is because it ultimately allows us to survive, right? Like that's back in the day when I guess we're hunting around for stuff. The concept of fear kept us safe. But a lot of the times these days, because we're almost not taught how to, I guess, like handle and deal with it, a lot of us can let it overconsume us. But what I've seen, what I've observed some of the smartest people do, and I even do this myself, like I try to employ it anyway as much as I can, is that we'll use the fear as fuel, right? And I remember it was actually my boxing coach. He said that the boxers that are the most confident, like the overconfident ones that don't have like the fear element, right? They tend to just get slapped about sometimes. It sounds paradoxical, but listen, because they don't have the concept of like this guy actually might take my head off, he might just completely clip me. They go into it almost like stupidly. But the person that has the fear and doesn't want to get hit, right? They approach it with more apprehension. Now, not to say that because crippling fear is just as bad, but if you use that fear to approach a situation in a smart way, right? It's almost like you could be sparring and you know that this person can just knock you clean out with one punch. So you approach it tentatively and in a way where, cool, like you're staying out of the way, but when you get your opportunity, you pounce, right? And it's almost like using fear as a fuel. And it's messed up because I think fear is actually a bigger motivator than, what's the word, like dreams and stuff like that, like hopes and dreams. It sounds paradoxical, but human nature, like we're naturally geared towards the negative, right? And if you think about it like this, if there was a big ass dog just chasing you, like he wanted to completely like rip you to bits, you're gonna run faster than you've ever ran in your life, as opposed to just running because I don't know, someone says they can give you a chocolate bar at the end of the race. So with that analogy, just basically learn to use it to work for you. And growing up where I did in Woolwich, it's almost like the fear, right? I'm gonna say of not wanting to be in the same environment 24/7. Well, number one is one of the reasons why my mum made me go to, well, she didn't make me, but she encouraged me to take the 11 plus so I'd go to a grammar school so that I wasn't going to school on ends, right? And then number two, obviously now that I'm in charge of my own life, right, the fear of not wanting to be in the same situation is what drives me to do better. So obviously buying more houses, raising more money, etc., etc., etc. So just learn to make it work for you. That's the second thing that I would say. And before I even move on, this is why it's good that I have my notes here. I wrote down earlier that growing up in South, right, it had trained me to act with fear instead of waiting for it to go away. So naturally, when making any type of big decision, or maybe if you're faced with something that plays on like your insecurities or whatever it is, right, you're always gonna feel the fear. That feeling never ever goes away. But it's almost like we're trained or we expect it to go away so that we can take the action. But that's never going to be the case because it's baked and hardwired in our DNA, right? So I say that to say this with the first house, right? Because I'm not really going to talk about the next ones because I had the experience. But before I had the experience, when I did my first one, it was almost like a anxious feeling, right? And that stems from fear when I was bidding on auction. And I didn't wait for that feeling to go before bidding because I knew that it's going to be here, right? So it's learning to, I don't know if it's fighting against your body, but feeling it, right, in your body, but still taking the action anyway. Feeling the fear, but taking the action anyway. Act in spite of fear. The more you train yourself into doing that, the better off you'll be. So the next thing that I wanted to touch on, right? So this is even the last thing, ownership. Now, ownership for me was the most important thing, and it was the thing that I seeked, right? Like I desperately wanted ownership because, well, number one, a lot of my, not even peers, but even elders, right? People that I would look up to. I remember one of them, he used to make a serious amount of money, right? He's in his 30s now. And one of the things that he told me, this was probably like 6+ years ago now, I think. We're having like a conversation, a deep one, and then he was basically saying to me like, Reese, look, with all of the money that you make now, cool, however much money you make now, it's all good and well, right? But just make sure you never ever make the same mistake that I did and not buy a house. And then I was thinking like, oh, why this and that, blah, blah, blah. Then he was explaining his situation to me, how obviously number one, money comes and goes, right? So he was making a lot of money, especially when you make money young, you end up spending it on a lot of random shit, right? Because it's like that saying, you lose it as fast as you get it, almost. Like when you make money fast, you don't really value it. So he just cut through a lot of money, he's done a lot of stuff, and in hindsight, he said that if he had only just took some of that money and just bought a house, right, it would still be here today. It would have jumped up in value. Obviously, he's a fossil, right? He's like 30 something. So he could have probably even bought back in, I think like 2008 or, like whenever houses, like the economy was in a complete rut and houses were cheap as hell. Even there was a period of time where banks were just lending out money, like more than 100% mortgages at one point. It was stupid. But he was saying that he could have capitalized, right, on the opportunity, used his money in a good way and actually owned assets. He was basically saying he could have been like 7, 8 houses up or whatever, but he had like nothing, right? Not nothing, but he just didn't have the yards anyway. And he basically, like, he seriously sat me down and said, "Do not make the same mistakes as me." And I was like, "Shit, okay, cool." And I really listened. So that, right, married with the fact that a lot of my peers and their parents, they didn't own any homes, right? And I remember when my parents bought their first one and then seeing it go up in value, like, just, it went from like this much to fucking over a quarter mil to whatever. The concept of almost making money by just owning something, right? You just put your money in the right place and it grew. That just always blew my mind. And then seeing Woolwich, especially Woolwich, Plumstead, all around there, like just getting gentrified on a crazy level, right? Like these big developers just building these massive apartment blocks and stuff like that. I always thought, like, fucking hell, like, imagine if, whoever owns this, right, this 100 unit block or whatever, if rent is always going up like crazy, right? If rent is like, I don't know, £2,000 a month or something, and there's 100 units, that's fucking like £200,000, per month. So I was always just thinking about flipping on, like, the people that own the stuff, they are the real breadwinners and they get to make all the decisions, X, Y, and Z, right? So I fell in love with the concept of ownership, really. And that's why when I started property, I didn't bother dabbling in like rent to rent and all of that type of stuff, because as much as you could make money and I could make money, I didn't enter property just to earn money, because I could make money in other ways, right? It was the ownership aspect that I thought this is the real power play. So my point, what was the point that I was making? Yeah, so I basically ventured to buying a house just after I graduated, and I never looked back since, though, because of the importance, and I understood what owning, right, owning my own thing could do for me. Yeah, that concludes me. That concludes me. I don't want to ramble on too long, but risk, fear, ownership, and how obviously South London grew up. How South London grew up. How South London, growing up in South London, played a part in those three categories. But yeah, these are just general life lessons, right? And what you guys should do is take whatever it is within any of these three things, right? Take a lesson from it and just apply it. Just apply it straight to your situation, because that's how we move forward, right? Direction, action, feedback. You get the direction from a lesson, a nugget, whatever it is. You take the action, and then the world gives you the feedback, and then you just continue through that loop. But let me know in the comments if there's anything specific that you want me to talk about, make a video about. I'm going to be making these videos weekly, so you might as well. And yeah, that's it. See you lot next week.